Canada is sitting on a metal that the world suddenly wants, and Europe is moving fast to get it. If more of Canada's clean aluminum starts heading across the ocean, the US could face a problem it never expected, and it may change who has the upper hand in making vehicles. What happens when the metal inside every pickup truck, every SUV, and every electric vehicle becomes the subject of a transatlantic bidding contest? That is no longer a hypothetical question. Europe is actively competing for Canada's low-carbon aluminum supply, and the implications extend directly into vehicle production costs, manufacturing strategy, and the structural advantage American automakers have relied on for decades. The arrangement that once felt permanent Canadian smelters supplying American factories almost automatically is being tested by a competitor that brings something the United States has not had to compete against before: a sustainability premium that Canadian hydroelectric aluminum is uniquely positioned to capture. For decades, the Canada-US aluminum relationship operated with remarkable consistency. Canadian smelters, concentrated overwhelmingly in Quebec and running on hydroelectric power, supplied lightweight aluminum that found its way into pickup truck frames, engine components, transmission housings, EV battery enclosures, and aerospace structures across American manufacturing. The two industrial bases moved in synchronization, Canadian supply feeding American demand in a relationship so consistent it rarely generated headlines. Trade policy and tariff escalation changed that rhythm. Facing new cost pressures and uncertainty in their largest market, Canadian aluminum producers began expanding into new export destinations, and Europe emerged as the natural beneficiary. European manufacturers responded with interest, offering market conditions and long-term purchasing commitments that gave Canadian producers a genuine alternative to dependence on a single buyer. The United States remains Canada's largest aluminum customer. But for the first time in the modern history of this relationship, it is no longer the only serious bidder at the table. The reason Europe's interest carries strategic weight rather than simply commercial weight comes down to one specific attribute of Canadian aluminum: its carbon footprint. Most of Canada's primary aluminum production runs on hydroelectric power, concentrated in Quebec's smelter network. That gives Canadian aluminum a dramatically lower embedded carbon footprint than aluminum produced using coal-fired or natural gas-powered electricity, the production method that describes a large share of global aluminum supply, including major output from China and other competing producers. For European manufacturers operating under increasingly strict carbon accounting requirements, that distinction is not a marketing detail. It is a procurement requirement that is becoming harder to satisfy with conventional aluminum supply and easier to satisfy with Canadian supply. For automakers engineering the next generation of electric vehicles, every kilogram of embedded emissions in a vehicle's components now factors into the overall sustainability profile, alongside performance metrics like horsepower and battery range. Aluminum already delivers a weight reduction benefit that improves acceleration, efficiency, and handling. Producing that aluminum with renewable hydroelectric power adds a second benefit, layered on top of the first: a vehicle that is lighter and whose materials carry a documented lower carbon footprint at the production stage. European manufacturers increasingly view Canadian hydro-powered aluminum not as one commodity option among many, but as a strategic input that simultaneously satisfies engineering requirements and regulatory sustainability framework. For companies working to reduce emissions across their entire supply chain, not just at the point of vehicle operation, but at the point of material production, Canada's aluminum offers a long-term solution rather than a one-time commodity purchase. Once European manufacturers recognized that environmental advantage, the conversation expanded well beyond individual purchase orders into long-term industrial planning. Europe's appetite for Canadian aluminum is not driven by short-term supply gaps. It aligns with a much broader wave of European investment across transportation, energy, defense, and advanced manufacturing sectors that will require enormous quantities of lightweight metals for years, not months. Modern vehicles depend on aluminum alloys for battery enclosures, suspension components, structural reinforcements, wheels, crash management systems, and thermal management systems. The same material is essential to aircraft construction, rail infrastructure, wind turbine components, military equipment, and high-voltage transmission systems. As European engineers across every one of these sectors pursue lower weight to improve efficiency and performance, aluminum remains one of their most valuable materials. This is not commodity trading. It is the securing of raw material access for an industrial build-out that European governments and manufacturers are planning across the next decade. Canada's aluminum, viewed through that lens, stops looking like a purchase and starts looking like a strategic position. Aluminum is one chapter in a far larger story that connects Canada and Europe across an entire spectrum of strategic resources. European governments and manufacturers have spent recent years working deliberately to diversify their supply chains following energy disruptions and heightened geopolitical uncertainty, a process that accelerated sharply after Europe's reliance on Russian energy became untenable. At the same time, Canada has been actively looking beyond its traditional near-total dependence on the American market. Those two trajectories intersect directly. The Canada-Europe resource relationship now extends beyond aluminum into LNG, uranium, critical minerals, hydrogen, and potash, a portfolio of resources that together underpin nearly every modern industrial sector. Aluminum fits naturally into that portfolio because it underpins vehicle manufacturing, aerospace, packaging, defense, and electrification simultaneously. Europe is not assembling a list of separate transactions. It is assembling a long-term resource relationship with a single supplier capable of meeting demand across multiple strategic categories at once, and Canada is positioning itself as that supplier. The question that determines how all of this affects ordinary consumers is what happens to vehicle production when this competition intensifies. Today's vehicles depend on aluminum more than at any point in automotive history. Automakers use it in body panels, suspension components, engine parts, battery enclosures, crash structures, and wheels, all in service of cutting weight to improve fuel economy, handling, towing capacity, and overall performance. Whether the vehicle in question is a full-size pickup truck or a next-generation electric vehicle, lightweight engineering has become a defining competitive advantage in automotive design. That is precisely why growing European demand for Canadian aluminum matters beyond the metals trade itself. If European buyers continue securing larger volumes of Canadian supply through long-term contracts, North American manufacturers negotiating their own future supply agreements face a market with a new and well-resourced competitor for the same aluminum they have historically been able to access without serious competition. At the same time, Canada is investing in expanded production capacity and advanced smelting technologies designed to reduce emissions further while increasing total output. That investment matters because it determines whether Canada's aluminum sector grows large enough to serve both markets without forcing a hard choice between American and European buyers, or whether the supply constraints that already exist in global aluminum markets mean that growth in one direction comes at the expense of availability in the other. The companies and countries that lock in reliable long-term access to low-carbon Canadian aluminum now, while that access is still being negotiated and allocated, may secure a structural advantage that becomes increasingly difficult and expensive for latecomers to replicate as global demand for low-carbon materials continues to climb. When all of these developments are connected, the picture that emerges is not one of Canada turning away from the United States. North America's automotive supply chain remains deeply interconnected, and the United States continues to be Canada's largest aluminum customer by a wide margin. What is changing is the competitive landscape surrounding that relationship. Europe has become a far more significant competitor for the same aluminum supply that American manufacturers have historically treated as effectively guaranteed. As automakers worldwide pursue lighter vehicles, cleaner production methods, and more resilient supply chains simultaneously, Canadian aluminum is transitioning from a straightforward commodity into a strategic asset, one capable of influencing sourcing decisions, production costs, and even the design choices behind future combustion vehicles, hybrids, and electric vehicles across the entire industry. The metal that goes into the next vehicle rolling off an assembly line in Detroit or Stuttgart is increasingly the same metal, and increasingly both cities are competing for it.